Hello, everybody. My name's Peter Bonnell. I'm the Senior Curator at Quad and Format as well. Welcome to another Quad and Format exhibition exploration. If you're watching this during the pandemic, I hope you're safe and well. And if you're watching it when the pandemic is over, hopefully soon, I hope you're still well. Today, I have the amazing artist Lottie Davies, who took part as one of the main exhibitions as part of Format 19 in 2019. In Crich Tramway Village. What we're going to do today with Lottie, I'm going to mostly hear from Lottie and not me. We're going to go through this 3D scan of the exhibition space by V21 Art Space, who produced this virtual tour. So, hello Lottie, how are you? And whereabouts are you today?
Hiya. No, I'm good. I'm in Cornwall. Long way down from you.
Well, one of the great things is we can go through our exhibition archives through Format and Quad as well. And as I say, this is no word of a lie. I'm not trying to butter you up. One of my favourite projects we did for Format last year was this beautiful show here in Crich Tramway Village. And to those who are watching or using this scan, just the scan itself, these circles on the floor can help you move around and navigate the space. This circle here will bring up the film, and we'll go to that in a moment too. So, Format 19 under the theme of Forever Now. And your exhibition was curated by the legend himself, W.M. Hunt, who's not able to join us today. But the essence of Format 19 Forever Now was that idea of archives, looking back, memories, shuttling backwards and forwards in time. And that is a perfect snapshot, or maybe imperfect, I don't know, of your project and a lot of your work in general, Lottie, as well. And one thing I picked from the text was the notion of this character, Quinn. You can see him just over there in the court on the large image on the rocks by the sea. That idea of post-trauma, and you talk about the direct links of trauma today. Obvious link today with what's happening with this pandemic. So these are universal themes that resonate with all of us. So with all that in mind, Lottie, would you be able to give us a overview of the Quinn project, please?
Yeah, well, thanks very much for inviting me. It's quite a large project, so I will attempt to summarise it briefly. Quinn is a fictional character, William Henry Quinn, and he is walking from Cornwall, in fact where I am now, to the north of Scotland post-Second World War. And it's intended to be understood as going to an exhibition, maybe going to the theatre, the movies, and perhaps reading a novel or a short story at the same time. Hence the various different elements in the installation at Crich here. The story is such that we follow Quinn on his journey through the British landscape. And while we do that, we read his diary, which you can actually see in the installation there by the bedside table. And in reading that, you understand his backstory and how it is that he came to be walking in the first place. So that's the literal story. But underlying that, the themes that I wanted to address with this project is, I think human beings are generally the same. Obviously, we have very different life experiences, and people live in different parts of the world. And especially now, it feels like a rather odd thing to say, given the prominence of the Black Lives Matter protests and all of those things that are happening in the world right now. But on a universal level, my feeling is that human beings experience many of the same things throughout life to different levels. And some people experience loss and grief and trauma and happiness and joy and all of those things that we all deal with on a kind of daily basis. And so Quinn is intended to be an everyman character who is traveling on his specific journey. But as we follow him, I hope that there are resonances of his fictional story in our own real stories.
The links with what's happening today with the pandemic and how that can really affect people and make them think about the sense of self in the world is so evident in this project. The interesting thing is you normally work in large scale installations, and what we had was the idea of working with William M. Hunt to make this installation at Crich. It seemed to fit so well in terms of the journey through the British Isles, and here we are in this sort of bucolic part of Derbyshire. Could you just talk a bit how you came to this way of working with William Hunt and how you developed the project to site it at Crich?
Well, Bill's brilliant. He really is amazing at being able to see the potential in things and think unconventionally, which was wonderful for me because I'm not a massive risk taker, I suppose. But Bill was so enthusiastic about the work that he really persuaded me to think in a much more creative way. And Crich, what a wonderful place. I mean, beautiful landscape, just stunning. And of course, a lot of the Quinn work, I picked some particularly lovely parts of Britain and places that meant something to me. And Crich itself, of course, is a unique location. And it was quite a challenge for me to envisage how I could fit this fictional world, this fictional character into a place that has so much resonance and so much concrete reality and so much history. But then being given this particular space, it's kind of slightly an odd shape. It's got about 3 doors, I think. And I was worried that because the pictures are so very large, how would I be able to put them into this space, which if we were to put images on the wall, would end up being relatively small. But as you can see here, being able to use full scale, full wall vinyls, absolutely just transformed the space and was really exciting for me to have it at almost life size there. I think Sam, who plays Quinn, is actually bigger than life size in that shot at the top of Snowdon. And then I love the idea of asking an audience to go right inside a space, to touch the objects, to sit on the bed, to flip through the diary, to really sit in Quinn's space. And this space allowed me to do that, which was really cool.
I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about this installation. You had some precious objects in there. There was the money, for example, because you had so many authentic objects that became part of the installation, even the vintage wallpaper. But the idea that coming to the space myself a number of times, and I would even find myself saying to people, yes, sit on the bed. And they didn't feel that they were able to do that at first. And then people slowly but surely started to do it. So you were so immersed in that environment, looking back at this huge vista, watching Quinn as he surveys the landscape around him, which I have to say this as well, that I found interesting reading your the various texts relating to the exhibition again, is that the byways and paths that you had Quinn traverse in this fictional story are things that people can walk today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it may be something particularly British. I mean, we have a great history in cartography, and who doesn't love an OS map? Those paths have been there for a very, very long time. And in fact, you might even be able to see in the shot of Snowdon right there, that's on the edge of one of the paths going up to the summit of Snowdon. And that's the miners path, which is traditionally the slightly harder one to walk up. That's been there for many, 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 many years. And there's something about walking along a coastal path or an old path anywhere, the fact that loads and loads and loads of feet have made that path. And there's a direct line to human history on just a really banal everyday level, but paths exist because human beings keep treading on them. So there's something I find kind of very resonant about that, and something very grounding about
very, very tangible physical memories etched into the environment, and so beautifully well suited at a place like Crich. And one thing I really enjoyed when I was looking at this scan, as well as the physical installation, the way in which not only is the visitor embedded in the space, but there's certain things that seem to reflect the various environments. The mirror here reflecting back of memories, backwards and forwards, fitted in so well with the Forever Now themes and ideas of archives and so on. One thing I was going to suggest to you, we could play a little bit of the film as well. Should we do a bit of that?
Sure. Yeah.
So let's play a little bit of the film. Go full screen. So where was this filmed, Lottie?
This is a place called Dollar Cove on the Lizard in Cornwall. So called because apparently a Spanish galleon once ran aground there, and you can find dollars in the sand if you're lucky. Quinn starts off in Cornwall. You understand why when you read his diary, but effectively this is where his journey starts. And you're introduced to him in this way where you don't really see his face. And as the sort of films progresses, you see his back, but as we go through, you see a little bit more of his face, and you see a little bit more of him as a person, and you get slightly larger in the frame. This was take 3. Sand by this point was really quite wet and quite cold, and the weather was quite bad. And if you wait a second now, you'll see he almost gets put into the water. There you go.
It's about 12 minutes long, as you can see. So you can watch this at home, full screen as well. And then you see Quinn on various stages of his journey through the countryside of Great Britain. Tell me something, and we discussed this as we started with the exhibition together, and I know you discussed it at great length with Bill, but the position of the film over that corner of the room, I know we had not issues, but ways of fitting the work into this slightly unusual space. That is an exhibition space at Crich. Was it deliberate to overlay that film work on the corner of that installation? Was that just to play with the sense of the story, of fracturing the story in any way?
I think what I find really interesting is installing this work and other work in different ways depending on the space that you get to work with. And I wanted the video itself to be, yes, kind of slightly, it works. I find it works really well in that corner because it distorts it. But also when you're sitting on the bed, it's kind of playing over you. So it's hard to quite work out what's happening. But if you were to look at it for a long time, you can see him coming in from one side and going out from the other. And in fact, the videos here, he doesn't get any further north than Derbyshire in the videos that we've included in the Crich installation, whereas the story itself, of course, goes a good deal further north. So the idea was that this boarding house set, whereas if Quinn had stopped on his journey and was looking back at the journey that he'd already taken to get there.
But what I like about it is these, as you can see in the image we're looking at now, is accident the right word, but that collision of what's happening in the film with almost what's happening in the physical installation, i.e. an overly obvious thing to say perhaps, but that boarding house that Quinn's in the film and the boarding house in the physical setup as well. One thing I was really intrigued by, and again, I've got to go back to this idea of not only were you presenting this fictional story, and I love it when artists produce these, but the way in which you tell this story about this fictional figure and make it so real, but the way in which you embedded the viewer into the space as well. And this is a little bit of a inconsequential question in a way, but I was fascinated by this. You allowed people to rifle through the drawers, to pick up objects, and you talked about this earlier on in our talk today. Were there any surprises that you came across with the way in which people interacted with the space afterwards?
Well, I think there's something interesting about asking an audience to actually interact with objects, because they are primed to not do that. There's something about you're in an art space, therefore you must not touch anything. Unless something is irreplaceable, I think that it's actually much more effective to to allow that, and yes, to ask people to rifle in the drawers and pick things out and fiddle with stuff and really explore it. And there's something incredibly resonant about holding an object in your hand that has had an existence for, some time beforehand. And for instance, we didn't include everything here because some of them, so for instance, the World War II penknife, we decided was probably not safe to leave around for people to just pick up but had it been included there, it has a particular weight. It has a weight to it, and it's got its own history because it's genuinely an historical artifact. But then also in terms of the fictional story, it has a fictional weight that kind of goes alongside that. So Quinn's books here, for instance, it's his toothbrush. There's some talcum powder there, which is actually from the 40s. And I did find that some of the talcum powder ended up on the table. So clearly people have been playing with it. But there's also something about that it smells. So the talcum powder smells, and it has that something about the scent of things is incredibly nostalgic. So if you were to smell old talcum powder, certainly for me, I am transported back to my grandmother, because she used talcum powder all the time.
Can I just jump in there with a little anecdote myself? When my nan died, my dad decided to take the carpet from my nan's bedroom and put it in my bedroom. But first of all, we had to take it outside and beat all the talcum powder out of it. So,
I bet your room just smelled
like talcum powder, but you're so right. It's almost that period, that nostalgia, but that period it locked in time, isn't it?
Nostalgia is really useful, right? I mean, I think there's an idea that nostalgia is bad or somehow, I don't know, saccharine, right? I think sometimes it can be, certainly. And there is a great deal of nostalgia around, the British and wartime. The Second World War was, prior to the latest hideousness that we're experiencing, was the biggest thing that happened to Britain in a very long time. And people were undoubtedly influenced by it and traumatized by it. And it has formed, I think, the way we view ourselves as a society. But I like to see if I can persuade people to feel a certain way by giving them objects or by putting things into images. So the wallpaper, for instance, and the Bakelite light switch you can see there on the right. I mean, it's got a really nice click to it. And if you feel with it, it kind of clicks really well, but it also makes you think of those old hotels you might have been to when you were a kid. So the texture of stuff and the patina of things, if you don't have access to that as an audience, then you're in the way that I hope that they do with this. I think you just don't get the full experience. So I would have loved to have made people take their shoes off and put their toes in the rug, but that might be going a bit far.
Everything is so beautifully crafted and collected together. It's one of the things, as I say, when I come across the few artists who are able to pull off a sort of fictionalized character or story and narrative and stories, and playing with memory and identity and personal histories is such a crucial part of your practice. But the level of detail that the emails we had where you talk about the latest find, for example, this lamp or the bedside table was a stunning sort of body of work put together. And I should say as well, that's the Herbert Museum in Coventry that you've just had a big overview of Quinn. Can you briefly talk about that?
Yeah, well, it's a much bigger space than Crich. So I was given a totally different challenge where it was almost too much space. So I created a similar boarding house set with similar wallpaper, in fact. But the videos don't play in that space. They play separately. So you walk into a large room and you see multiple films playing at the same time, which gives you a very different understanding of what Quinn's journey was like, because there are many, many more. And you see his figure multiple times in your field of view. The boarding house set, I changed what you see from sitting in the bed. So everything else is pretty much as you see it here. But if you were to sit on the bed in the Herbert Museum, you're confronted with 3 walls which are covered in text. So text from the diary, obviously not all of it, because the diary's not terribly long as diaries go, but much too long to put the whole lot on the wall. So there's very large sections, very, very large lettering on the wall in front of you. So it's slightly more nightmarish, I think, in experience. The diary is there as well on the bedside table in that installation too. So you can sit on the bed and you can read the diary, but you're confronted with the words, with the inner narrative in a very different way to hear.
Is Quinn going to continue onwards, do you think? Do you think you'll be developing it even further, adding more to it?
I'm not going to be adding any more to the project itself. I'm finally done with it. It was 6 years. The last bit was finishing the diary, which I was basically procrastinating about because I find writing very difficult, but also very rewarding. So I have this push-pull of not wanting to finish it because I'm enjoying the process, but also hating the process because it's hard. So I put it off for ages and ages and ages. In fact, I forget who it was now, some famous writer, possibly Dorothy Parker, I think, said, I hate writing, but I love having written. So I wanted to put off that moment of finish, but it is now finished. But the exhibitions, I'm hoping, will continue. Before lockdown happened, I was with Wewer and Bruce, who are a team of producers who are helping me take it to other places. We were literally about to put in our Arts Council bid for a wider tour, and then everything stopped. So it will be installed in Oriel Colwyn in North Wales, possibly this autumn, possibly next spring. That's the only thing that is currently certain. But once we're able to look further afield into the future, we're very much hoping to take it to other places. And I'm looking forward to installing the work in really different ways, because the places we're looking at, some are very small, some are larger, and finding ways for the audience to engage with the character in different spaces is something I really relish.
Well, Lottie, thank you so much. I'm going to do a quick wrap up now. Could talk for ages, and hopefully we spirited it along really well. I thought it was a lovely overview and whistle-stop tour of Quinn at Crich. So I'm going to say a few thanks. I'm going to say thanks to Arts Council England for their continuing funding, Derby City Council too, University of Derby, who put huge amount of funding into FORMAT International Photography Festival, Arts Council do as well, and Derby City Council as well. The Museum Development Fund, who kindly funded a large portion of this project too, and Crich Tramway Museum, to Mike Gaylor, the General Director, and his staff who helped us so much with this fabulous exhibition. Lottie, thank you so much indeed for doing this talk with me today. I really appreciate it. To everyone who is watching this, stay safe and well. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks again, Lottie.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.